Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Soul Speak. This season is How to Fully Embody Your Talents and Gifts and Light Up the World, a tribute to Wayne Dyer. And our quote from Wayne in this interview is, "People who want the most approval get the least, and people who need approval the least get the most." So welcome again, and I will set the container as always. My intention here in Soul Speak is for you showing up in our theme this season on how to fully embody your talents and gifts and light up the world, that just by you showing up in this experience and listening without actively having to do anything else, that you're sending out a message of permission to your own consciousness that is allowing further integration of this theme to happen organically for you with a grace, with an ease, and allowance. So just say yes or an agreement internally for that to take place for you. You're just allowing yourself to align with the theme and the intentionality of this season. Thank you for doing that. So now on to introduce our wonderful guest, Dr. John Wadude Laird. He's a medical doctor who has been on the forefront of the holistic medicine movement for 40 years. He noted early in the movement that body, mind, spirit medicine generally lacked deeper understanding of spiritual transformation. Dr. Laird's personal spiritual practice for over 30 years has been in classical Sufism. Spiritual healing in this tradition is based on deep and subtle understandings of the human heart. He is also co-founder and past president of the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, and has played a leading role in shaping academic and clinical instruction. He has taught and led personal healing sessions to thousands of people worldwide. Dr. Laird, welcome, and thank you so much for being here on Soul Speak.
Thank you, Sheldon, for the invitation, and looking forward to our interview and to being with your audience.
So why don't we dive right in, and would you explain a little bit about Wadude, your spiritual name?
Okay. Sure. Sufism is a spiritual path that's often considered the path of the heart. It's considered a mystical path, which means basically the Sufis are interested in understanding the subtle causes of events and integrating what you could call the inner worlds and the spiritual worlds with what happens in the three-dimensional world. So, gosh, it started when I was I think I was going to Dartmouth College at the time as an undergraduate in New England. It was one of those beautiful fall New England days. And I was just walking through an orchard and kind of minding my own business, and all of a sudden I just had this overwhelming, I just say, dissension of divine presence. And I just sensed that everything in the universe, underneath everything, it was all about love. There was nothing but love. And I wasn't taking any drugs or anything like that. It was just, it's all about love. It's all about love. And it's one of those divine states that can sweep through sometimes. And from the Sufi perspective, it's the divine worlds, the veils between the human worlds and the divine worlds were parted for a moment to see an underlying reality, which is called the reality of unity in probably many different traditions. So, of course, that sort of heightened spiritual state gradually went away over the next couple of days, but it led me on a search. I was invited, I went to a workshop during my medical internship up in Boone, North Carolina. This is, like you said, probably 40 years ago. And the workshop leader said, well, let's go outside during the break and let's whirl. And I said, what's whirling? And she said, oh, that's what you did when you were a kid. You put your arms out and you just spin around and turn and turn. And I said, look, lady, when I was a kid, I played football, baseball, and ice hockey. That's what I was doing as a kid. She said, try it. I said, okay. So, again, it was another experience where I just started whirling in the way of, the classical Mevlevi dervishes. It wasn't in that way, but, that's how it's known internationally. I was just whirling kind of innocently, and all of a sudden I was just in the music of the spheres, this sort of divine, beautiful music that was on the inner. And after 10 minutes, everybody else in the workshop went back into the workshop, and I just kept whirling. I whirled probably for an hour. It was just pure ecstasy. Again, no drugs, unbidden, just happened. And I said to the workshop leader, who was also a physician, actually, pediatrician, I said, "That's pretty amazing stuff." And she said, "Oh yeah, that's Sufism." And I said, I didn't know Sufi from Goofy, but I knew that I was being called to this particular tradition. So I studied with a teacher in North Carolina with a few other people. We started a spiritual community outside of Asheville, North Carolina, in around 1980, and we established. I founded one of the first holistic medical practices. In the middle of the Bible Belt, which is a little bit challenging for some of the churchgoers in the area. The Baptists and Methodists who actually came to our center loved the care that they got because it was what we'd call nowadays integrated medicine. Other people who were more afraid of something new were wondering if we were from the devil. And so I think we split the churches kind of split down the middle, but those who had interaction with us saw that this was health care that was bringing not only medicines and surgery, but also really good solid care and individual attention and health promoting therapies and much more choice for patients. So we did that work. My wife started a preschool, which eventually grew to be an elementary school, and 30 some odd years later, both these institutions are still going and serving people. So even though I live in California now, so that's been very, very beautiful. But fast forward to 1994, 95. I was introduced to a Sufi sheikh who lived in the Mount of Olives. He actually just passed a week ago. But he lived in the Mount of Olives and was a major educator and teacher in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is kind of ground zero at all of this conflict that's going on in Jerusalem. And this was somebody of the kind of stature that I had read about, like a real sheikh, someone who taught the real message of peace, love, and mercy, and was tirelessly working for peace, working with prisoners and poor people, but had what was kind of hidden. He had major, what would you say, stature and role politically. He was sort of like equivalent of a Supreme Court judge in the early days in Transjordan. But very, very deeply versed on the inner. So I was just led to him by friends, and I knew how maybe some of your listeners have taken spiritual teachers, decided to study under spiritual teacher, and since I'd done that earlier with an earlier teacher in Sufism, I knew that was a big deal to do that because you're really committing to study and to learn and surrender and trust. So at the time I was living in Santa Fe, and the teacher was visiting some of his family members in California near San Francisco. So I flew out to San Francisco, and on the plane I was just thinking back and forth: should I take technically it's called classically take the promise or make the promise to study. So I said, should I take the promise? Should I not take the promise? Should I take the promise? Should I not take the promise? And I landed in San Francisco and rented a car and drove up into Marin County. Should I take the promise? Should I not take the promise? Should I take the promise? Should I not take the promise? And I knock on the door, and a voice says, very loving voice says, come in. And I open up, and it's just this person who had become my teacher was just sitting on the floor, just sitting on a mattress. It was very sparsely furnitured room. He says, come in. I look up at him. He looks at me. He says, take the promise. And I was going there for healing. There was a piece of healing I was looking for myself. And the transmission was, on the inner, if you will, and this to relate to our topic, the transmission was, if you want help from Spirit or help from God, then it's important to make a heartfelt commitment to that tradition or to that God or to that you step in and you got skin in the game.
Yeah.
And so I went down and made the promise, or took hand is another way it's said in this tradition. And the student is given a spiritual name, and I was given the name Wadude, W-A-D-U-D-E. I said, and Wadude is the quality of God, which is the love. So when we say God is love in the Sufi tradition, you would say God has the quality of al-Wadude. So I asked my teacher, and I said, why am I given this name? And he said, Wadude means the one whose heart carries the deep love of God for the people, and who brings the deep love of God to the people. That's what he said. And it felt like a piece of kind of like soul guidance or spiritual guidance that up until then, I think a lot of my spiritual path was, you might say, for my own development, and I certainly had a lot more development to go. But the sort of the new marching order, if you will, from Spirit was it's going to be more and more about bringing love to the people and helping people's hearts experience love and experience healing. And you could say, in a sense, not so much about myself. Certainly not about, what was your quote in the beginning? Certainly not about getting approval, or recognition from the people, but just serving from a deep place of service. That's how I got the name Wadude. There's a young kid who was going to take hand with this teacher several years later, and probably a 5 or 6 year old. He looked at me and he said, "I sure hope I get a cool name like you, Dude."
Right.
Dude of love, I guess, on a good day. I'm the dude of love. Anyway, so precious. Yeah. Precious. It has some precious connotations for me.
So Sufism, let's talk a bit more about that as well, and some of what you discussed. Quick note for myself: Sufism is the path out of which, or the tradition out of which, Rumi and Hafiz all come out of. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And people who've read their work know that that love is really the keynote of the Sufi path. It's often called the path of the heart. Although I suspect that any authentic spiritual path develops the qualities of the heart. But for Sufism, it's a keynote. Why is that? Well, from the perspective of the worldview of Sufism is that there is one creator who created everything, who is beyond any of our ability to understand or to categorize or to conceptualize or to direct, or timeless and without infinity in all dimensions and understandings. So in Sufism, really in Arabic, the name of that the deity is called Allah, which means literally the God. In the Aramaic, it's Allahu, the language of Jesus, Allahat, and there's variations in Judaism and so on and so forth. From the standpoint of sacred language, Aloha in the Hawaiian languages, the sounds of Ah are common for many of the cross-cultural names of the Supreme Deity. And Ah is a sound that, for people who are experienced with chanting or with sacred language, Ah is a sound that literally opens the heart chakra, which is one of the energetic dimensions of the heart. So in any case, Allah is the creator, and when we say the human being was created in the divine image, the Sufi understanding of that is that the human being was created in perfection. You might say it's the exact opposite of original sin. The human being was created out of beauty and majesty and celebration and joy, and in the human being's pure form is a majestic and very special creation, let's say. So that divine form, if you will, that divine image, results in, and this relates directly to the heart, it relates to the fact that in the heart of every human right from the beginning is a divine treasure chest of qualities, of divine qualities, of beauty. And those qualities would be true for everyone. Love, peace, mercy, compassion, strength, knowledge, wisdom, power, life, many, 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 many different qualities, classically considered 99 qualities. But when we say in the many different traditions, like Namaste, the divinity in me salutes the divinity in you, or the light of Christ within, and all these different ways, I think are recognitions that the essential, undamaged, uncontorted nature of a human being is sacred. And the Sufi perspective is that this, the core of this, is held in the heart. So the question is, what's the heart? So, we of course, the heart is a physical piece of flesh, but conceptually, we've gone way beyond that now in our discussion. The heart is what my teacher once called the subtle lordliness that's within the human being. So the heart is this center of sacredness. For those with inner sight, you can see this as lights, as different lights that are held within the heart. So everything starts off, especially if there's a loving relationship during conception and pregnancy and delivery, and there's no artificial drugs or any of that involved, and the child is born in, let's say, optimal circumstances. When you see a child after they're born, they're fantastic. They're just so magnetic. Everybody wants to be around them, and a child, newborn, looks at you, and everybody melts, and it's like it's obvious that this isn't original sin. This is original, spectacular gifting to the world, and this is true of everyone. I went down to Mexico City on an invitation to teach to some Sufis there, and who were kind of just beginning, and where people were considering Sufism, and of course most of the audience was Catholic. And when I described that, from Sufism, there's no original sin; it's original beauty. I mean, the whole room just lit up, and people said, "Wow, tell us more," because there's a group that naturally gets worshiping God, but it had been historically in a context for them that was sort of stained with I'm bad, but I love God anyway. So anyway, when we look at children, we see, wow, what a fantastic creation. Now the question is, I don't know about you, Sheldon, but people don't come up to me when I walk into the room and say, "Oh, you look so wonderful. Oh, look, he's smiling, he's moving, he's looking at me." So like, what happens between those early days where everything we do draws rave reviews and now? Well, one of the things that happens from the Sufi perspective, again, you can find parallels in other understandings, is that life happens. Life happens. We've got the child who is exquisitely sensitive and aware, and yes, immature. These divine qualities in the heart are, don't carry they don't carry maturity and strength and realization. But this purity runs up against just life. The bowels have to start moving, and gas forms, and it can hurt, and the child cries, and as the child actually tries to integrate all these spiritual realities into the world, and they run into things like colic and stuff like that, which may be one of the ways that this grounding process is forced to happen. They get hungry, and they have to poop, and they have wet diapers, and mommy may or may not come with the milk, the breast milk, or the bottled milk, and all sorts of things happen that sort of disrupt this sort of nirvana kind of experience that a child has on the inner planes, at least when they're birthing or before birth and after birth. So what happens from a Sufi point of view is that the natural qualities of the heart begin getting covered over, and we become increasingly veiled to the true essential nature of who we are. And, in the Eastern traditions, this could be similar to the concept of samskara. In Sufism, these are like impressions that are literally registered in the heart. Again, with the inner eye of a healer, you can see them as pictures or shadings, energetic shadings, memories. All these things begin to get imprinted on the heart specifically. So when people, after 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, they sort of metaphorically look inside and say, who am I? What they witness is not their essential nature. They witness their interpretations that they've made of all the events that have happened in their lives. So if mommy wasn't there with let's say a feeding, who knows what conclusions are made pre-verbally, but post-verbally we make conclusions like, well, mommy isn't there for me, or mommy doesn't love me, or God doesn't love me, or God abandoned me, or there must be something wrong with me. We start making interpretations and meanings that we paste onto events as they happen. And this concept is also one you can find in many different systems of belief. In mindfulness, there's a stimulus, and we have a response, and usually we just respond instantly. In the work of Marshall Rosenberg on nonviolent communication, something happens, and we make an interpretation of it. In the training from Landmark Forum, they say there's something happens, and we create story around it. It's all pointing to the same thing, that whenever we have any experience, we're instantly categorizing it and making meaning out of it when it doesn't necessarily have any meaning. Certainly not the meanings we create. Out of doing this again and again and again and again, our brain, which is wired to create patterns, to discern patterns, starts creating patterns, and we would say this starts creating self-identity, and our identity about ourselves and about other people and about God and about what's possible for us and what's not possible for us. And we're just living in a world of, you could say a world of mirrors, a funny house, where we've created all of these beliefs which no longer serve us. They're, from my point of view, they're based on lies that we tell ourselves. There's no judgment around that. We all do it. We just create a box. And from the Sufi point of view, the key place to start with all this is with the heart, to develop awareness of what's happening in the heart and to begin to bring healing to the heart. The heart actually registers impressions constantly, thousands and thousands of times a day. And these impressions come through our senses, they come through the thoughts that we have, they come through the beliefs that we have, they come through what we see and what we hear. All of these things on the subtle planes have impact on the heart and the well-being of the heart. So I would ask you, Sheldon, just to have fun with this a little bit. How often do you wash your hands a day?
Well, I would say probably 5 times a day.
Okay. All right. So 5 times a day. And the question, and sometimes people, 10, 15 times a day. And the question that I often ask audiences or students is, how often do you wash your heart a day? How often do you wash your heart a day? And then, we begin to realize that, we spend more time, not more time, but we wash our hands more than we consciously wash our hearts. So is there there's no puzzle around why do we have so much heart disease just to get started, even leaving aside all the impacts of diet and dietary and environmental toxins. So the Sufism is seen from one lens, at least, as really the care of the heart, and that's where I might say heartfulness comes in. Heartfulness is actually a term that's been used in other more psychological contexts, but for the Sufi, the key is to remove those veils. We would call those veils these constrictions, these false beliefs. To remove them step after step by helping the heart connect directly with, we say directly with Allah, one could say directly with the divine light, and teach people how to open the heart so the heart can actually receive directly this light from higher realms and allow these places to dissolve, to wash away in a gentle way. As that happens, first of all, there's more well-being, there's a greater sense of freedom, but ultimately where we're headed with this is that people begin, when they look inside, if you will, they begin to see in fact, not through belief, but in fact, in direct experience, that they do carry divine love. They do carry divine wisdom. They can access divine knowledge. They have access to divine wisdom. They have access to what we call their inheritance. The divine qualities are inherited by every human being, if you will, before they're born and when they're born. But if you aren't aware that you have an inheritance sitting in some bank somewhere, then it doesn't do you any good. Theoretically you're a millionaire somewhere, but if you don't access that and you don't know about it, then you're living in assumed poverty. But once you begin to know who you are, and again, this says, I tell my students, you don't have to believe anything I say. The question is, can you have the experiences over time that, where Spirit, God is beginning to teach you who you are in truth. Once people begin to taste that, then they realize, yes, this is true for me. And it's an incredible gift for people to have, number one, to receive, and then to be able to give to other people. So that's Sufism through one lens, and it's the vehicle that Hafiz and Rumi used, if you will, for their own process of purification. You could say there's a process of self-purification. And when that happens sufficiently, you could say dissolving the ego. It's deeper than that, but as the ego dissolves and the constructions of false identity dissolve, and one's being accesses divinity more readily, then what comes out of the human being, and this is the key and goes to directly to the fantastic topic of your series here, is you truly embody the talents and gifts that you have. And I would say that's a combination of what you've inherited plus what life has brought you and what turns you on about life and what excites you. In reality, I think it's all orchestrated, at least in my life it seems. In retrospect, it's all been orchestrated by divine intelligence. But this embodiment of talents and gifts from Sufism starts in the heart. And if this great Sufi saying, if you want to be generous, it's good to be rich. So if you want to be if you want your light to shine in the world, it's good for your heart to be overflowing with light, so that it doesn't occur as, oh, I'm getting burnt out, and now I got to go, whatever, take a bubble bath to increase my light, or it's like you're creating light out of you could say your solar plexus. You're creating light out of your personality. You're being caring and compassionate because that's what you should be. That's not sustainable. What's sustainable, as I don't remember who it was, whether it was I don't know who it was, but to be the change in the world you want to see. So to have a heart that's overflowing with love allows you to have a sustainable way in which to give service, to give love, or to give peace, if you're working for peace or justice, to have a heart that's overflowing with justice and peace and love, because you've cleaned out a significant amount of the constrictions in the heart that prevent love and prevent peace and prevent a commitment to justice. And so you're moving in the world with an overflow of light, and that gets replenished from the source of the light that you seek to distribute. With the name Wadude, partly for me, it's all about love. So I can try to be a loving person. That's better than nothing, a lot better than nothing. But to carry the presence of love, because it's being kindled within the heart or being sent down from on high, however you want to understand it, is more sustainable and more impactful. And yes, there's always striving. You have to show up in the world. You have to be three-dimensionally competent in the world. But we're really talking now, when you talk about light, you're talking about an inner quality, and to have one's heart plugged into the source of the light that you feel called to distribute is, like I said, it's sustainable, it's beautiful, and inspiring for people.
So how does, John, somebody, or in the Sufi tradition, how do you, or did you, and do you continue to purify? What are some practical ways for some of the listeners who don't know anything about this tradition, but are resonating with what you're saying, and how could they step right into that process?
Okay. Well, it's a great question. The different aspects. Let me say that when you referred to the fact that I was a co-founder of the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, which I think is sufiuniversity.org. And we can talk about it at the end of the program, but there's a whole series of free classes and courses and guided meditations, you could say, that people from your program can access. So in some ways, that's the most sort of detailed option that people can have. But we can talk about that at the end if you'd like, very briefly. But let's see, what could we say? First of all, that you're to put your spiritual life as a priority would be the first thing. I was recently invited to give a lecture on essentially what I'm talking to you about at a very high-level academic medical conference where Mayo Clinic and Minnesota Center for Spirituality and Medicine and UC San Francisco, some of the real heavyweights academically and who are training medical doctors and nurses and pharmacists and so on and so forth. Some of these places have made wonderful commitments to create healthcare practitioners who carry awareness and compassion and mindfulness and so on and so forth. So, nothing was like that 40 years ago when I trained. And so they've made a real commitment to do that. What was real clear was that they were fitting into curriculum. They're trying to fit in where we're going to do a little mindfulness here, and a little meditation work here, and a little meditation, yoga, whatever, self-care kind of stuff here. And I raised the question to the whole group. I said, I get that. It's a crowded curriculum, but, and we're trying to find work-life balance, but I found in my own life, whenever I try to create work-life balance, work always wins out. So where I've come to is it's important to make your, talking about what we're talking about here, is to make your spiritual life the priority and not try to fit it in because you have a busy schedule. Even if you are busy, make it a priority. So in people who used to teach, and maybe it's still taught this way, people who used to teach prosperity, workshops and how to become independently wealthy and all of that stuff, they'd say when you get your paycheck and you have this, let's say you got $500 a month to spend, that you write your first check to yourself. Meaning, let's say I'm going to save $50 a month. So you write that first check to yourself because by the end of the month you'll have $50 in savings account. Whereas if you're going to, I get to that at the end of the month. At the end of the month, that $50 is spent on something else. So every day is, when you have a paycheck, and what are you going to do? So beginning the spiritual practice, making your spiritual practice a priority, and putting it, for me at least, in the beginning of the day. And even if you get up early, it's important. It's more valuable than the sleep. It would be more refreshing than the sleep. In Sufism, which comes out of classical Islam, which is a part of classical Islam, I would say it's the jewel of Islam, but it also carries the jewel of, spiritual traditions in general. We pray 5 times a day. Well, when you pray 5 times a day, you're constant in a way that has divine blessings with it or behind it. Your heart is being washed. You're setting aside, even if it's just 5 minutes, 5 times a day. Your heart is being constantly washed, and the kind of ego grunge that builds up in the course of a day, anxiety or density or whatever, it's like that's constantly getting like released and released and released and released. And when you take on a practice like that, you're actually not only releasing what's accumulated hour by hour, but you're beginning to wash away backlog. So if someone has a prayer practice, a meditation practice, it's fantastic. Before I was in Sufism, I did a meditation practices. Honestly, 5 times a day was like brought benefits beyond anything I'd ever experienced before. But to generalize for the audience, regular prayer, regular meditation, at least a couple times a day. Certainly in the beginning of the day and before you go to bed, or it would be ideal times. Thirdly, it has to do with, I'll just give you something from Sufism straight out. It's said that Sufism is actually about, in the deepest way, is about becoming one, living in unity with the Creator, with God. And that's even deeper than becoming, you might say, a righteous person. A righteous person, if they get angry, they want to return to being more even-keeled. If they get upset, they want to return to being a good person, you could say. Sufism attracts people who you might say want to disappear in God and be one with God, and to have a heart that's fully reflective of these divine qualities I'm talking about. So classically, that's referred to the path of those brought near. So brought near in the sense of ultimately what Rumi and Hafiz are writing about. They have this incredible ability to language states of unity, which, first of all, to be given that access, and then secondly, to put it in poetry is stunning. But how did they get there? So the six one way of describing it is there's 6 habits of those brought near, so I could share that. One would be to eat less, sleep less, and to talk less. Those are the first 3. So eating less is a recognition that when we eat more than we need or more often than we need, that creates a density in the human being. So in Sufism, classically, one eats only when they're hungry. The recommendation, these are really from the observed habits of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was that the recommendation was that we eat 1/3 food, 1/3, we fill the stomach, if you will, with 1/3 food, 1/3 liquid, and 1/3 air. That's how it's translated. 1/3 air means we don't eat until we're full. We leave the stomach, partially empty, so that there's air and there's ability to digest, and it's not too much. Well, now there's all sorts of scientific data that shows that calorie restriction leads to longevity and reduces the cause morbidity and mortality from all major diseases. So, and that doesn't even bring into account the kind of high sugar, high carbohydrate diets we have. So there is some scientific underpinning for that now that, of course, wasn't available 1,400 years ago. So eating less, not eating till you're full. It's in the tradition, in our tradition, to fast. So the fast in our tradition is from the first morning light until sunset, you could say. So it's not a 24-hour fast like happens in Judaism. So there's a full breakfast before you start to fast, and then a full dinner after you fast. In Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, the fasting, which happened before Islam came on the map, the month of Ramadan was recognized in that part of the world as a month of fasting. That's 30 days. It's actually easier to fast for 30 straight days than it is to fast like 1 day a week or 2 days a week, which would be in our tradition to do it 1 or 2 days a week during the year, plus Ramadan. So fasting, prescribing fasting is beyond anything that you and I can do, Sheldon, and the call here, because certain people it's not medically appropriate to fast. But in terms of just talking general principles, there's now research coming out that short fasts like this also lead to increased well-being, improvement of the immune system, and longevity, decreased disease, so on and so forth. So a gentle, carefully thought through fasting program for those who are inclined and aren't dealing with they're not frail, they don't have significant blood sugar problems. One can still fast with blood sugar problems, but it needs to be supervised. And the key here is that any of these spiritual practices need to be moderate. They need to be in balance. Even Sufi sheikhs are in the world. They're not. They're married. They have kids. They have jobs. They're functioning in a three-dimensional world. Otherwise, if you take any of these to extreme, you become a space cadet, and then you're not grounded, and then you're not going to the title of your series here. You're not embodying anything because you're out of body. So all of these things need to be done gently and in the wise way. So reducing food, reducing drink, reducing sleep. Probably the optimal for most people is 6.5 to 7.5 hours a night. I'm sleeping more than that. I'm probably sleeping 8 to 8.5 hours as I'm seeking sort of extra rest. But I still get up at, now it's like a little bit after 5 in the morning to do prayers and so on and so forth. So sleeping less, this obviously doesn't address people who have trouble with insomnia, but sleeping too much actually can create its own densities in the being. The other 3 things out of the 6 of the habits of those brought near that may be practical for people. One would be increase. So the first 3 were decrease food, drink, and talk. The others are somewhat similar. One would be to increase retreat time. So to take time during the week or the year to really be in a private retreat. It could be for a few hours, it could be for a day, it could be for a weekend, could be for a week. But to take time where you've separated yourself from life as usual, to be with your own spirit, to be with your Creator, if that is languaging in a worldview that you're comfortable with, to really take time to be alone with your deeper self and deeper spirit. In our work, sometimes it can be any of those, a day, a weekend, or a week. There are sometimes we have literally healing retreats where somebody comes to a week-long or 5-day-long program where they have specific issues or concerns, medical, physical, spiritual, psychological, that they want to work on. So we've actually combined sort of retreat practices with healing practices, working with actual healers that we trained at the university. So that's sort of a healing retreat. It's a little bit more active than sitting in a retreat cell somewhere, or being alone in your tent and and outside in the national park somewhere or something like that. But all those are options. Someplace where you're renewed and revigorated and have a chance to go deep. That you want to increase the amount of time that you do that. Most people probably barely can work that in. Nobody's working it in unless they're trying to work it in the kind of culture we have today.
Yeah.
Increasing what's called remembrance is probably the most key for this particular interview. Remembrance is a practice where the Sufi sits and recites divine, I guess called chants. We don't call them chants, but divine chants, where they sit and recite those in the heart, out loud and quietly. And these are special practices that allow the heart to begin to let go of what no longer serves it and to begin to open to one's own divine nature and on the inside, and also to receive light that one experiences sometimes as descending or incoming light. Descending, I guess, is metaphorically light comes down from the higher worlds, but that light's all around us. But so that's called remembrance, the practice of remembrance. Rumi refers to it all the time. In that website I mentioned, there's actually a guided meditation on the remembrance that I give, that the university's put up on a website for free, and it's very simple to follow along. So why do the Sufis have a practice of remembrance? Because we forget. As human beings, we forget who we are. We forget our divine connection. We forget our divine inheritance. We get all wrapped up in the world, and I'm just like anyone else. And so the practice of remembrance allows, well, and again, it's setting aside some time. It can be done for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour. Is, again, dedicated time to yourself and to your spiritual connection. What I deeply appreciate about the Sufi practices of remembrance, and it's the only spiritual tradition I can talk about in depth. But I know that the chanting, if you will, that's handed down through this tradition carries with it a spiritual blessing, or baraka is another word, so that it's, what would I say? It's like it's clearly divinely blessed that if someone has a sincere heart, humble heart, then as we say, or as we say, God has said, God says, when you remember me, I remember you. When you remember me in a circle of people, I remember you in a higher circle. So I teach students when they're doing the remembrance to develop the awareness to say, okay, you just remembered God. Now, how did God just remember you? What was sent? What was sent that was beneficial for you? It might be a sense of opening in the heart, or more awareness, or a sense of peace, or expansiveness, or it can be different. There's not a particular experience somebody's trying to have, because the art of remembrance is just placing your heart in a position where your intention is to open and receive to higher realms.
Mm-hmm.
So if you try to control it, then it's just going in the opposite direction. So we have a practice called remembrance. And then the last thing of the 6, we're going to increase retreat time and increase the practice of remembrance. The last one is, it is increasing reflection. Reflecting on, we would say classically, reflecting on God's signs. Well, what might that be? Give you a good example. We have a Sufi center in just east of Napa Valley out here, close to where I live, just east of Napa Valley, in a place called Pope Valley, or the P like the man in the Vatican, Pope Valley. And we had a 6-year drought here in California, so things are really dry, really parched. And our springs have been running low. And they're seasonal springs in any case, but they've been running low. It's been a challenge. So as we really sat with that and said, well, is there anything we can do, you can say from the human level, that might make a difference, we looked at and we felt that within our community, because we're a community of human beings, there had built up some, what would you say, some resentments between people. There was separation between people. There were some hurt feelings between people. Some people felt not heard. Other people felt like, children weren't getting the attention they deserved, and people didn't have any children thought, well, that's not so important to me. And, so it just sort of kind of just slowly just kind of deteriorated over a couple of years, which anybody who's been involved with community or organizations of any type can recognize. And we said, we really need to walk our talk here and be in integrity to walk our talk. So we undertook the process of finding the places in our own hearts that had whatever resentment, separation, sadness, wanted to not deal with it, whatever it was. Everybody was encouraged to do his or her own piece, sort of clean up our own acts individually, and then we had a couple of community meetings just to share what was relevant or useful to share, increase the dialogue, and right after that, the springs just opened up. I mean, physically they opened up, and the water started to flow. So our understanding of that is water is often a sign of divine love. It's almost an archetypal thing. It's a sign of life and divine love and mercy and compassion and forgiveness. So one could sit and reflect on it, and as I reflected on that, I was like, wow, that was either an incredible coincidence or there's a direct connection. There can be a direct connection between the amount of water that's flowing, metaphorically within our own hearts, and the amount of water that is being mirrored, if you will, being mirrored to us by the springs in our community. It was a very strong teaching for me. So reflection on signs is, there's many, many signs. Things are a desert, and when the water is sent, the desert blooms. When the water recedes, then things die and get parched and brittle. And what does that mean? What is water? What is the quality of water? So there are an infinite number of signs. So that people take time to reflect. I'm terrible at that. I don't spend much time on that. But when I do, I always find that it's fruitful. Last thing I'll say, Sheldon, is that I would say remembrance is the most important. But my teacher has said of those 6, probably the most important initial thing is to reduce food intake.
That's not the one I would have guessed.
I wouldn't have either, and it's just, again, that's something you sort of have to sit with and look more deeply at what is the impact of food, and food in a way kind of it's I mean, if you compare that with fasting, food has a way of it supports a kind of a density, it supports a kind of an animal appetite nature. Fasting begins to release one from that. So getting our food into balance has more spiritual benefits than I would have ever guessed, 15 years ago.
Now that I reflect on it, I can see how incredibly important it is, because food is a drug. It certainly can be used
there you go.
as a drug.
I could have said that a lot quicker if I had said that. Perfect.
And I just had a few cups of coffee this morning, so I can attest to that. And then, of course, ice cream and sugar has its own wondrous little journey to take us down. Thank you so much. We do need to come full circle and talk about the organization and give people the website again and talk about your free gift. And so, if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit more about that.
Okay, I'd love to. When I got the invitation to share with you and your audience, I thought I just asked the people at the university, what can we give people? Just as a gift that would be a true benefit. My desire is that things are truly beneficial. So my understanding is at sufiuniversity.org, www.sufiuniversity.org. There is a 7-day e-course of spiritual renewal and healing that somebody can sign up for, and that's the bottom line. If you sign up for a free e-course, there's daily self-directed program. There's an audio-guided meditation of remembrance, which I really super highly recommend. It's truly beneficial. I've worked with literally thousands of people, so it's beneficial. And then also something new I didn't know, but anybody who's on that e-course is invited to attend free live calls on a weekly basis where people can ask questions, get help, or just enjoy listening to other people. So, and I assume that when you sign up for the e-course, you get the weekly, phone number and all of that. So it's a triple package of the e-course, the guided meditation, and the free calls for people to ask questions.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go sign up myself
yeah,
and see what we're doing over there. Yeah. So anyway, I truly hope that's beneficial for people.
It sounds like it absolutely will be, and I'm sure those who feel called, it already, I mean, what you've shared here today has been beneficial already, so anything further is just a deeper layer and extra icing on the cake.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for being here today and sharing with our audience both your journey and who you are and your devotion and sincerity and leadership and journey, and also the information on Sufism and the wonderful tradition of the heart.
Thank you, and can I thank you for your inspired series and the interviews that you're doing, and you deeply care that people are really able to live a life where, they do share their light in the world. So I think it's fabulous what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today and Dr. John Laird, and just click on the link on the page with his biography and his picture, and that will take you to the website and the free gifts that he talked about. Okay? So until we meet again, God bless us all. Thank you, Dr. John Laird.
Thank you, Sheldon.